The night before it ended, the war in Europe did not feel like it was ending at all. It felt heavy, unfinished, like a storm that had run out of thunder, but not yet out of rain. Across the continent, cities were broken, roads were filled with refugees, and armies that had once shaken the earth now moved like exhausted animals searching for a place to lie down. Somewhere in northern Germany, columns of soldiers marched west, not toward victory, but toward surrender. They did not look at each other. They did not speak. They only walked because walking west meant survival. Walking east meant something else entirely. Far away from them, in a quiet corner of occupied France, the lights were still on in a school building that had once been filled with children. Now it was filled with maps, radios, and men who had not slept properly in years. The walls that once held drawings and arithmetic lessons were now covered with arrows and colored pins marking the collapse of an empire. Outside, the air smelled of wet earth and gasoline. Military police stood in the rain, stamping their feet to stay warm, watching every road and every face. Inside, the atmosphere was thick and tense. Officers spoke in low voices. Secretaries moved quickly with papers and coffee. Telephones rang and stopped and rang again. Everyone knew history was approaching the building, but history was late. It always was. In Berlin, only days earlier, the world had changed in a single moment. The man who had started the war was gone. The city that had once been the heart of a terrifying machine was now a ruin of smoke and rubble. But the system he had built had not died with him. It shifted, reshaped itself, and tried one final gamble. A new leadership emerged, smaller, weaker, but still dangerous in its desperation. They understood that the war was lost, but they refused to accept that everything was lost. Their plan was simple, ruthless, and built on fear. They knew the Western Allies feared Soviet expansion. They knew the Soviets demanded revenge. So they tried to create a fracture. If they could surrender in the West while continuing to fight in the East, they might save hundreds of thousands of soldiers. They might even preserve the core of their army. And in some dark fantasy, they imagined a future where former enemies could become allies against a new threat. Orders were given. Messages were sent. Time became the most valuable weapon they had left. On the roads of northern Germany, civilians dragged carts filled with blankets and photographs. Mothers held children. Old men limped. They all moved west. Rumors spread faster than truth. Some said the Americans would treat them well. Some said the British would be fair. But the stories about the East were different. They were full of terror, revenge, and chaos. Whether true or exaggerated, they fueled the panic. At the same time, German units tried to break through Allied lines, not to fight, but to surrender. Sometimes they approached waving white cloth. Sometimes they simply stopped firing and waited. But Allied commanders had begun to notice the pattern. Entire divisions that had fought fiercely days earlier suddenly appeared at their front, seeking safe passage. Something was happening.
Someone was coordinating it.
In France, the Allied headquarters received message after message. Requests. Proposals. Delays. Each one carefully worded. Each one attempting to gain time. The Supreme Commander listened. He read every report. He understood exactly what the Germans were trying to do. He had spent years watching them manipulate, deceive, and exploit weakness. He had no intention of allowing it to happen now, not at the very end. He remembered the early days of the war, the retreats, the losses, the long nights when victory seemed impossible. He remembered the beaches, the dead, the cost. And he remembered the camps that had been discovered in recent weeks. The evidence of crimes that were beyond imagination. That memory hardened him. When the first German envoy arrived, the contrast between expectation and reality was immediate. The man had prepared for diplomacy. Instead, he entered a room that was plain, functional, and cold.
There was no ceremony.
No comfort. Only maps showing his country's destruction. He tried to speak of honor. He tried to speak of civilization. He tried to speak of the danger in the East. But the response was firm and unchanging. Total surrender. All fronts. No conditions. The envoy hesitated. He pleaded. He delayed. Finally, he admitted he had no authority. He was only a messenger. He asked for time.
Time.
That was what they wanted most. The message was clear. Send someone who could sign. And hurry. Days passed like hours. Every minute meant more German troops reaching the west. Every minute meant more civilians escaping. When the next representative arrived, the atmosphere changed. He was composed, controlled, and confident. He carried himself like a man who still believed he could influence events. He believed that words could still reshape reality. He was escorted through hallways filled with officers who did not greet him. He noticed the silence. He noticed the lack of respect. But he continued forward, convinced this was only a tactic. He asked to meet the Supreme Commander. He was told no. The insult was deliberate. It removed the illusion of negotiation. It placed him in a different role. Not equal, not partner, but defeated. The discussions that followed were not discussions at all. They were demands and refusals. He argued that his troops in the East would not obey. He warned of chaos. He described fear. He offered phased surrender. He spoke of humanitarian necessity. The Allied officers listened. They did not change their position. He pressed harder. He spoke of political consequences, of future cooperation, of common enemies.
Still no change.
Finally, the Supreme Commander delivered his response through his Chief of Staff. It was calm, precise, and devastating. Sign immediately, or the Western lines would close. No more crossings. No more safe passage. No more surrender. German troops attempting to reach the West would be turned back. Refugees would be stopped. The meaning was clear. Every life depended on the signature. The German general understood at once. The game was over. There would be no deal. No delay. No maneuver. He requested permission to contact his government. The hours that followed were among the longest of the war. Radios crackled. Messages were encoded and decoded. Cigarettes burned down to ash. Men who had commanded armies now waited for a reply like clerks. Outside, the rain continued. Finally, authorization came. In the early hours of the morning, the room filled with witnesses. Cameras were prepared. Lights were arranged. The document lay on the table. It was short.
Direct.
Final. When the German representative sat down, he felt the weight of history pressing on his shoulders. For years, he had been part of decisions that shaped continents. Now he held a pen. His hand trembled slightly as he signed. One by one, the others added their names. There was no applause. No celebration. Only silence. The war in Europe ended not with explosions, but with ink. Afterward, the German general attempted to speak. He chose his words carefully, trying to preserve dignity, trying to reshape memory, even in defeat. He spoke of suffering, of endurance, of shared hardship. The room remained cold. No one responded.
He left.
Only then did the tension break. Officers shook hands. Some laughed. Some sat down and simply closed their eyes. The Supreme Commander remained calm. He understood that victory did not erase loss. Too much had been sacrificed. He sent a message to his leaders. It was brief. He believed that history did not need poetry in that moment. Only truth. Across Europe, guns fell silent. In cities and villages, People emerged cautiously. Some cried. Some stared at the sky. Some could not believe it. Soldiers who had lived for years under constant threat suddenly felt emptiness. The noise was gone. The fear remained. For the defeated, the future was uncertain. Many would face trials. Some would face justice. Some would face shame. For the victors, new challenges began immediately. The war had ended, but peace was fragile. In the months that followed, the world learned more about what had happened in the shadows. Camps,
Crimes.
atrocities. The surrender became not just a military event, but a moral turning point. The refusal to negotiate, the insistence on unconditional surrender, the denial of honor to those who had destroyed it, these decisions shaped the future. Years later, people would debate whether mercy or severity was the right path, whether reconciliation should have come sooner, whether dignity should have been preserved even for the defeated. But in that moment, the memory of war was too fresh. The wounds were too deep. The men who had signed believed they were closing a chapter. They did not realize they were opening another. The Cold War would follow. New tensions, new fears. But for one brief morning in 1945, the world experienced something rare. Silence. No artillery. No bombs. No orders. Just silence. And in that silence, millions of people felt the same fragile thought at the same time. It was over. Yet even as celebrations began, the memory of those years lingered. Veterans would carry it for the rest of their lives. Civilians would rebuild, but never forget. Children would grow up hearing stories that sounded impossible. The schoolhouse in France would return to being a school. Children would sit where generals had argued. They would learn history from books, unaware that the floor beneath them had once held the end of a war. And somewhere, far away, survivors would remember that the end had come not with vengeance, but with a decision. A decision to stop fighting, to accept defeat, and to face judgment. The war had begun with ambition and arrogance. It ended with exhaustion and ink. The world had changed forever. And the question that remained, long after the guns were silent, was simple and haunting. Could humanity learn from it?